Well, that played out differently. So there's been an interesting series of developments in regards to the casting of one of the characters in the Hellboy reboot. And this wasn't something that I was planning to talk about. I had actually kind of deliberately left it off the most recent episode of the podcast, Go Home Hollywood You're Drunk, part of the Council of Geeks podcast feed. Give it a listen. Just because I wasn't sure I had anything to say about it, and that particular podcast is more lighthearted, and I kind of didn't want to open that can of worms. But it's turned into a bigger story, at least in terms of people reacting to it and how much traction it's getting than I had expected. So given that I've talked about race recasting before, I might as well step right on this landmine again. In case you haven't been following, the actor Ed Skrein, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, at this point best known for as the villain in Deadpool and also as the original Dario Naharis before he was recast because he left to do other projects. He was cast in a role in the Hellboy reboot that is currently being worked on. Now, the character he was cast at is a character named Ben Damio, who is a character I'm not familiar with. It's been a long time since I've picked up a Hellboy or a BPRD issue or volume, so I don't know if he was introduced back when I was still reading it or if he's new or if I just don't remember him. But apparently Ben is a Asian character. He is written as such. That is how he appears in the comics. And Ed Skrein is not. He very clearly is not. And when the casting was announced, there was not a completely unexpected, if you've been following these kinds of things lately, outcry about that casting. Now, that's not particularly unusual at this point. It's actually... It's gotten to the point where studios need to stop acting surprised when this happens. But it was the response to what happened that I find really interesting and I think worth talking about. There was basically the official story that came out, and I'm using that word for a reason. I'm gonna kind of address that as I go along. Was that Ed Skrein himself voluntarily said, I'm not going to play this role. Stepped away from the project, issued a statement saying that he had not appreciated the impact and the concerns about him playing this role, and he thought the most respectful thing he could do was to not play the part. After he did that, the producers and the makers of the movie released their own statement, basically backing him up, saying, we respect Ed's decision, we're going to cast racially appropriate and move forward. And this is all really interesting. I mean, for the first thing, I'm pretty sure it's the first time, certainly the first time I can remember, at least since I've been paying attention to this kind of stuff, where an outcry about the racial recasting actually resulted in that casting being changed. I'm sure there's some way. It may not be the first time it's ever happened, but it certainly feels like the first time in recent memory. Because generally the line from studios, producers, etc., the people who make the casting decisions is, well, we have to cast a white actor because, you know, there aren't actors of whatever the ethnic group is of, you know, sufficient stature for us to cast them. And that's an argument that I think is holding up less and less as time goes on, especially as the outcry against it is becoming greater and greater. You have to wonder if the PR nightmare is worth whatever boost to box office they think they're getting, that I think arguably they're probably not even really getting in the first place, because I don't think movie box office numbers are nearly as driven by star power as they used to be. But in any case, in terms of that theory, it's more defensible and from a strictly bottom line dollar box office pragmatic standpoint defensible when you're talking about the lead role. When you're talking about a supporting character, why can't you have a non-white ethnicity as a supporting character. So that kind of argument doesn't hold up. But it's still the argument that would always get made from studios, from producers, and from those types of people. So the fact that that isn't what happened here, that's interesting. The fact that it appears that it is the actor himself who made the decision to step down, which I do kind of want to address that specifically, because if that is actually how it went down, then tip of the hat to him, because and I think there's a decent chance that is how it went down, because at this point Ed Skrein has a pretty solid career going. He's not a huge name, but he's working very regularly. He's working in you know, recognizable roles, and he can afford to let this one job go, because I'm pretty sure he can line up something else really quickly. So I think there's a pretty good chance that this is in fact how it went down. That being said, if it ever transpires that what actually happened is that the studio responded to the outcry by terminating him, but telling him, you need to tell people it was your idea to leave. We can't tell people that we're firing you. If that ever transpires to be the case, that I'm going to call massive BS on. And call BS on the studio. Not for caving to pressure, but for obfuscating what they're doing. I mean, if you're going to, you know, change or alter something because of how the fans reacted, own up to that. I mean, that sort of thing happens all the time with relation to other things. Remember back with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles reboot, the one that Michael Bay was producing? They were going to be aliens, but when the fans went, ah, they changed that. And Shredder was going to be this white guy, and fans went, ah, and they changed that. So, you know, you can cave to pressure. Just cop that you're caving to pressure. Don't make an actor throw himself onto the sword. I have no evidence, and I don't even think I believe that's what happened, but I just want to address that as a possibility, because I think it is a possibility. But by and large, I find this whole turn of events to be kind of encouraging, because, you know, there's always a lot that gets kicked up on all sides when a character their race is changed, their gender's changed, any kinds of things. But for the purposes of this video, let's just stick to race. And that you know, there's a lot of stuff that gets kicked up when it is a traditionally, you know, non-white part given to a white actor, or a traditionally white part given to a non-white actor. And again, I'm not talking about either one of those being more valid or another. I really don't want to deal with that. I'm just acknowledging the fact that regardless of which way it goes, there is always going to be an outcry, and there always is. I think something that is just in general going to help in terms of settling things down is just cast to the original character description in terms of when you're adapting something. I think, and again, that's not me saying that there will never be a valid reason to change the ethnicity of a character. I did a whole video about why, you know, before the Iron Fist TV show came out, I thought on balance it probably would have been a better idea to recast Danny as an Asian American character. But that was very specific to that case. I had reasons for thinking that was the best in that specific case. But I think in broad terms, more in the case of non-white characters, you need to leave them as non-white. I mean, the thing is, regardless of how you feel about it, you know, the reasons for when it happens or is considered that a white character is changed to another ethnicity, the simple fact is that there isn't a white representation problem in terms of numbers of roles given to actors in terms of how these characters are written. There is a representation problem with other ethnic minorities when it comes to movies made in Hollywood. So it's just a really bad look to take away the few roles written to not be white that there are when you do adapted works. Now, you know, things like Ghost in the Shell and and Death Note, I think are a little bit trickier because they are, in fact, adaptations of a story from a completely different culture, and you're actually moving the location to America. So, you know, why wouldn't you cast, you know, to reflect where it's set now? And I mean, I mentioned Ghost in the Shell. That one really did it wrong in terms of the casting, and then they tried to address it in the movie and made it worse. But the waters get muddier when you're dealing with that kind of adaptations, because, you know what, you really need to look at a case by case for, you know, why did something like Ghost in the Shell do it so wrong, whereas something like The Departed, which is based on an Asian film, I believe a Hong Kong film, and then, you know, set in Boston and cast pretty much all white people, why did that one do it right? So, you know, it muddies the waters when it's that kind of adaptation. But Hellboy is an American comic book. It's an American property being made by an American studio that has some diversity in its cast in the source material. So not keeping that is just a bad idea at this point. And I like that the makers of this movie seem to recognize, oh, okay, we made a mistake, we're sorry. And I'm hoping that the metrics are gonna shift to break studios out of that mentality that I mentioned before, where they think, well, we have to cast white people because all the biggest stars are white people. And again, I would personally make the argument we're just not in a star-driven entertainment economy anymore. I'm not saying stars have no value, but they don't drive, you know, box office the way that they used to. And beyond that, it's being shown by the repeated and consistent pressure that gets put on, you know, studios, directors, etc., when these sorts of ethnic characters are taken away and not allowed to be played by ethnic actors, that outcry from early films was not a fluke. It's going to keep happening every time they do it. And I'm hoping that the realization of that will make them really start to go, oh, okay, we really can't justify this move anymore. Or maybe at the very least, you know, maybe we get a boost to the box office, but it's not worth the crap we're gonna have to deal with. And that is sort of my hope coming out of this particular thing, is that this reaction to the outcry, which I think, again, assuming that the official line on what happened is in fact what happened, I think that it was well handled by Ed Skrein and by the people behind the Hellboy reboot, and I hope it will become the path forward for, if nothing else, just not taking away the roles that are actually written to be something other than white people. And even if we can get to the point where that stops happening, that doesn't mean racism is solved. That doesn't mean casting disparities are solved, because, you know, there's still issues of proportional representation. There's still issues of the fact that when we're talking about non-adapted works, they're often still written excessively white, and all these other things, which are not things I want to tackle in this video. So, but what I'm talking about in terms of just the studios might finally be clicking that this thing, taking these roles away when there is the chance from a source material to cast an ethnic minority, just cast that minority. If we could have that be the norm, that's a good first step towards getting a better balance overall and just cutting through the crap that keeps happening all the time. So yeah, I think I'm done. So those are my thoughts on this whole sort of casting thing. I don't want to call it a controversy because, like I said, it's been fairly civil, at least in terms of how it appears to have gone down. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting. And like I said, it's a topic I've tackled before, to my pain oftentimes when it comes to the comment sections, but I haven't shied away from it before. I'm not going to shy away from it now. So there we go. What were your thoughts on this whole little thing that happened? Whatever they are, Please keep it polite, but drop your thoughts down in the comments and let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast feed. I am also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast. Both of those available on iTunes and Stitcher. It's not called iTunes anymore, isn't it? Is it Apple Podcasts or whatever it is? It's available on there. Until next time, this council is adjourned.